Hello, everybody. We're back for our third session on turning airlines into retailers, sponsored by Sabre. This discussion is our third discussion, and we'll be focusing on what's the future going to look like. When airlines are successful, as we hope they will be, at turning themselves into retailer, what's the end game picture going to be? So what I'd like to do is throw out the question out there. It's the year 2020. We worked hard. We've done pretty much all the things that we want it to be. What does Virgin Australia look like at that time in terms of its customer experience?
In my view, and I can't predict the future, but it would be somebody wants to go buy a ticket. They probably even have a little chip in their credit card. Their credit card is so smart, and it has all the data from all their past travels that you just click on that. I want to go back to Sydney, and it keeps track of everything that individual's done throughout all their other travels. And it knows by repetition of what product's most important to them, automatically assigns that product, and they move on through with their journey. It almost becomes automatic and seamless.
Seamless journey with a major partner,
right?
Exactly. An external partner.
And we do that now with our alliance partners, and Etihad, Singapore, and Air New Zealand. We try to make that as seamless as possible already today. It's not perfect, but it's getting there. But I really believe that at some point in time, there's so much data coming in that the airline systems and each individual airline knows so much about their individual passenger and customer that they'll know everything that they want if they correlate the data properly, and it'll just be almost instantaneous.
The other side of the world, what Koala is going to look like?
Yeah, I think to add, I think the conversation is really adding elements to ultimately what the end result looks like. But, for me, this customer data offers this massive opportunity to re-engineer the way we look at loyalty. For us, I think what's going to be important, I think you want to be able to control the elements of what you want to do with your customer in terms of that overall kind of recognition, and maybe not to use the word loyalty anymore, but more of that kind of recognition elements, and be able to contextualize that for every customer. So what's important to that specific customer, and how do we personalize the recognition through times of trouble as well as obviously through the good times, in terms of what's important to that customer, and have control, and to surprise and delight that customer. I think the customers will have certain expectations, but where you go above and beyond, and where you can, take some social media data that the customer will have and associate what's important to the customer outside of their journey with you. Something that's a key enjoyment of theirs. It might be an activity, and he might be the person, or she might be the person that becomes one of your highest value customers. Recognize that in some way, shape, or form into the future. Tell the customer, we're really thankful, but here's something you enjoy. We know that you travel every week. We know you go through our lounge, and we know that that is an expected privilege. But here's something that's contextual to you in terms of us providing you with specific recognition and thanks in terms of. And I think that's what started to build relationships with your customers. So having this flexibility, having a volume knob at that back end of the system that you're able to control, because we still have to make a profit at the end of the day. We all know what the margins look like. So we have to ensure that we can also manage the cost of these programs, and programs that are, I guess, not kind of out there, not published, not specific boxes that people fit into, but programs that become a little bit more dynamic, a bit more surprise and delight in nature. I think that becomes another key opportunity in terms of how you take the data, what you do with the data, and ultimately how you surprise and delight and recognize your customers into the future.
So Amy, Virgin America, year's 2020.
2020.
What's it look like?
Every guest has a personalized experience when they book their ticket. It's not the same for any two guests, because we know who they are and we know what they want. The booking experience is, okay, I'll give it 2 touches, 2 clicks.
Yeah.
Here I am, here's what I want, the dates I want. Everything else is already there for them, and they're done. It's that fast, because we know exactly what they're going to buy. We offer it up to them, give them easy ways to change it if they don't like it, but it's that fast.
Now, Gary raised an interesting point of external partners. I'd like to ask each of the airlines and other folks too, if you had to have a single partner, non-airline partner, tomorrow to integrate this into, who would that be? Would you like to take this?
Non-travel partner?
Non-travel. I'm thinking, would it be...
Starts with the letter G. Because if you think about it, right, who knows more about us than Google.
Ah, okay.
Right? So
He's like, which
it's,
Jim?
it's got,
Thing.
it really is a
Valid
question
point.
of
Okay.
if we're trying to figure out where I can get the maximum amount of data that has context, has value, and has now, I can get the intelligence out of that data. There is nobody finer at doing that, rightly or wrongly, and has more information on us than Google. We touch them more times than we touch anybody else. So I think that the question really it's not necessarily a nice one. Do I like the answer? No. Do I respect the answer? Absolutely yes. So I think that the question really should be is in our world is do you try to make, we call them AGFA, Apple, Facebook, Google, and Amazon. Do we keep those guys hands off and away? Do we embrace them? Or do we just have to coexist with them? And I think every airline is going to be different in how they answer that question. So for when it comes to data, you have to embrace Google. You don't have a choice. But when it comes to whether I play with them and whether or not they will let me play with them, remember it's the other way around because who's dominant in this relationship, I think we're all a little submissive, whether we like it or not. I think that becomes the context of our dialogue. And if you go back 20 years ago, that was never even seen. The amount of information that they have on us and their ability to present that information is, I think, is unheard of. We've never actually had to deal with that issue before. And now we must live in that world. And that world will not change.
No, it'll
I
only
agree.
grow.
I agree. I agree. They're, you know, certainly from what they have, I think therein lies the danger. You know, because one does become, or can become, extremely reliant on their ability to deliver you passengers, and in that there's a cost of distribution that potentially can just go up
Make
and
the
up and up.
GDSs look like, you know,
Correct.
a bargain.
Yeah. So you know, I think what's important is to work with your own partners in terms of how you ensure that at the end of the day, you know, you're focusing on that experience that the customer's having with you when they fly with you, because that's what's going to keep them coming back ultimately. You know, and if you can meet those needs and you can ensure you can recognize those customers, that is ultimately going to be your biggest strength in how you get that customer to come back. So for me, if I was to say, you know, from a partnership perspective, I think you've got to focus on your ecosystem. You've got to focus on ensuring that ecosystem is integrated in as best way as possible, and that the data lives in all of those touch points. So ultimately, that customer has that consistent experience across all elements. And you know, I guess for us, the biggest challenge is how you're going to keep customers coming back to you in terms of your .com, in terms of your mobile app, or in terms of, you know, just this direct conversation that you need to have with them.
Interesting question from Larry Leong via Twitter. It's with regards, we talked about analytics right now, but looking at them very dynamically, what role do you see as predictive analytics playing in the airline industry? What's it playing now? Where do you expect it to be, hope it to be, in 2020? Anit?
Yeah, so if you think about the conversation we just had like an hour ago, the conversation was about data that exists today, but in different systems. How do you bring it together so that you get a view, so that you can actually take that view and provide an experience to your customers that's unique and different, both to impact, let's call it, you know, their loyalty in a positive way, and plus to drive potential revenue uplift. If you think about what others are doing, other industries, going back to our opening tee up, that cater to consumers, for them it is they're trying to figure out what their propensity to buy or to want is. So it's figuring out what they want before they actually know what they want. Right? So that is a secret sauce that you actually have to go crack.
What's a good potent example? What would be a...
Yeah, I mean, a good potent example is, I fly to Mumbai maybe 2, 3, 4 times a year, and I've got a pattern. If you look at what I've done over the past, because my parents lived there over the past, let's say, a decade, right? Now, if there were heuristics around it, there was pattern matching around it, and of course, sometimes I've traveled business, sometimes I've traveled with family. It's kind of figuring all that out and say, okay, what's my next possible trip or two? Will it be business? Will it be personal with family? And what are the kind of offers and what kind of experience matters to me? And why do I keep getting promotions that are completely irrelevant? Because there's so much that the airline knows now about me if they just look at 10 years. And what gets interesting then is my trip isn't with the airline alone, right? It's about the ecosystem. It's about the travel partners. So airline is one part, but what about car rentals? What about hotels, etc.? So how do you start marrying those in and then provide the experience that you're talking about? And really, I think if you look at what's happening in the consumer world, we're talking about experience here, but again, they're talking about lifestyle choice, right? So how do you actually get to, so you're talking about service today. How do you get from service to experience, and ultimately, how do you get to that lifestyle choice, and how do you kind of cross that spectrum, if you will? So that is the absolute future from our perspective. So again, if you just think about it, right? Merchandising today, impacting on customer experience. Okay, understanding the customer data to bring it together. Okay, great, you brought it together, but then ultimately the nirvana is you have to figure out, what are the travelers going to want before they want. Once you understand their propensity, once you kind of pattern match them with what others are doing, and if you can crack that, that is gold. And that is, I think, what we think Amazon and others are doing.
Well, there's two factors I think at work here. The first one is the creep factor. So don't necessarily offer me something that, if you know this much about me, the creep factor does kind of come in, right? But I think there's an assumption you've made, Vineet, in this, which is, do I trust you to give me this information reliably? And what I believe, going back to the future view, is we're going to have a world where we trust certain brands, we utilize others. So if I have a utility brand, my utility brand just says, oh, you're there. I don't care which brand it is, it's milk, right? But if I have a brand that I trust and I respect, I will trust that person to allow me to leverage those things. So don't abuse that.
That's right.
Gary was saying that maybe you asked me if I've ever had a good experience on an airline. I've had lots of good experiences on airlines, right? But even on his, right? But I think this issue of trust is so important. Yeah. It is getting to the plateau of trust is huge. When we tell you something, is it trustworthy? Yeah. Now, we tell you a lot, and in that noise, there's a couple of little zingers in there that might just not be 100% accurate or a complete representation of the real picture of the truth, but it's there. What happens with that? So I think that airlines have a very trustable brand value proposition that they can give out. And it amazes me how many airlines screw that up because they really just abuse it. So if you're kind of self-deprecating about that trust ability, and you remember that it's a two-way street, and you keep that value proposition going, that is maintaining you to this higher level where you exceed that other utility, the milk, if you like, where I can say, yes, I'll trust this value. And that, I think, is going to be the differentiation. And I think that now airlines are no longer seen as herd, bovine herd, air bovine, or bovine air, whichever you want to call it. I think that they now have that ability that they didn't have that ability before, even as recent as 10 years ago. I think they now have that ability. We have the tools to do that. And it's now up to the brand to match that trustable value.
I think that's a fair point.
Amy, what is Virgin America thinking about in terms of predictive analytics, what it might be doing for the firm and its customers?
Well, I think it's a lot of what we've talked about. It's about taking the data that we have and making sure that we're doing, the right things with it, and figuring out what truly is a pattern and what truly is indicating customer desire versus just using the data and dumping it all
Yeah.
in. I mean, there's so much it could be a total data overload, and you still add everything that you could possibly think of to a guest experience, but that's not the point, right?
Yeah.
The point is how you're kind of nuance the data a little bit, like, and figure out exactly what you're trying to achieve and what it actually does say. Like, Vineet, I was thinking about your example. Wouldn't it be cool if about the same time you normally book your trip to India, that I tell you, hey, did you know we're on sale right now? And typically you book right about now. Would you like to take a look? I mean, those are the types of things that are actually useful for guests. And so I think it's going to be tricky. There's a lot of data out there. It's how you actually, make sure that you're making useful and correct, like almost not guesses, but actually making it mean something.
Okay.
So I don't know that I have a better answer than that.
No,
We've been talking about it for a
that's it.
long time, but I think that's probably the best thing.
And I think there's another dimension to it, which is if airlines have all this data, traveler-facing interaction is one aspect, which is, but how can airline manage their business better?
Yeah.
Which is, if I've got access to so much data, and you kind of brought this comment up, which is yield management takes a whole different transformation, so to speak, because you're no longer trying to optimize just seat revenue, you're trying to optimize, total trip revenue based on all the ancillaries. There's also a timing element associated with it. And then from an operational point of view, as you think about customer experience, it isn't just about the traveler, it's about making sure, you got your crew there, then you got your flight movement there. How do you kind of bring all of them together so that, to Timothy's point, isn't just about what you say, it's about how you fulfill on what you say, and then it's the trust factor you build over time. So there's a big aspect of this around how do you get analytics into the way you run your business as an airline, into your operations, as well as your commercial planning.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
It's a big opportunity. There's the link to so many elements of the business. There's reduced costs of running your business, because at the end of the day, if you get these elements right, you don't have to market as hard. You've got more loyal customers. Your efficiency and your processes, your delivery, in that operation, you're lowering your costs. At the same time, you're increasing your revenue. You're engaging more with your customers. You're driving up your NPS. You're getting more people that are going to say, wow, I had such a great experience. So bringing that picture together for that 2020 vision, there's so much commercial benefit across a really wide
It's remarkable about this industry. I mean, most industries I've worked with is like, how do we get the data? Where are we going to source it? This industry is pretty remarkable for, you've kind of got the data to a certain extent.
It's just how to
it's
use
inside
it.
the tent, and therein lies the challenge. I mean, it's
We
complete.
think we have.
Oh, think we have the data.
Right?
Excuse me.
And occasionally we might even have the right data.
I would argue we have the
I
data.
think we have
How
it.
you actually use the data is the tricky part.
And how you get access to it, right?
Yeah.
So a wise man once told me many, many years ago, right, that web services would change the world. And if you couple the ability to both receive and push data with web services, it makes the receiving system kind of irrelevant as long as you can push that data back and forth, and it really opens up the opportunity to get at the data.
Yeah, but what's important today might not be important in 2020.
Fair.
So you have to be
Well, that's true.
dynamic
Yeah, yeah.
and change,
And change.
at the same pace that the world around you is changing. Lounges weren't that big a deal 25 years ago. There was hardly any of them. Now, if you don't have them in key markets,
And
You're
why?
in trouble.
So you ask. So what are the drivers of these changes, and how do you keep your business relevant to those changes? One of the reasons why a lounge has become so important to a frequent traveler is because the rest of the airport is such a crappy experience. I believe that we should have people sorting at the mouth of an airport, where you have, do you understand up, down, left, and right? And if you fail that test, you go into the places where you go today, and only people are allowed in the lounge if they obey those basic commands. It would make the whole world a lot easier, and we would have a nice fluffy world. That isn't it. So the context of the experience that we're trying to do to deliver to the customer, it varies. I have a friend, and when he came to visit me when I was working at Microsoft, he was gone for 30 minutes to go get a sandwich. And he came back and he said, do you know how many questions they asked me? All I wanted was a sandwich. They asked me 17 questions. And he goes, well, that's completely irrelevant. But I think this is where we need to understand our customers better. It goes back to that other point. In 2020, what will our relationship be with our customer? Will we actually be in control of that customer, or will somebody else be in control of that relationship with the customer? Will we have to use channels that today might be nascent but could be fully fledged in this time period, that we all live in a quote-unquote Google world or a Facebook world, whatever it might be, that we have to subsume some of our requirements on both sides of the customer experience, the supply and the user, to having to work inside that world. What's that world going to be like? See, I kind of worry that that is something that's already occurring, and it's occurring around us, and we don't have any control about that. And it doesn't matter what we might say we want to do. But going back, I think, to the original question about whether or not we're going to be able to do something, I think there's a situation in the US market which is different, and I think this is going to affect more and more markets as we reach the infrastructure threshold points. And that is, we won't have as much choice as we think we have, because we won't have the capacity in airports to deal with that problem. So will we move from a demand-based system inside the airline world to a total supply-side system? You look at the load factors today on US carriers, 90% load factor, there is no choice. At 75% factor, yes, maybe you have choice. But if you don't have choice, does the airline care? It certainly feels that certain carriers are taking that perspective. It's, sorry, you know what? You don't have to fly my airline. Good luck out there. And don't tell me you haven't felt that.
We do have a question, and it concerns from Larry Leung, and it concerns working with airports. And I imagine there are some silos in this business. I imagine airlines and airports should be symbiotic. I imagine that they're probably not. What is some of the touch points that are being made and could be made between the airlines and the airports?
Well, in Australia, we work very closely with the airports, being a large country demographically, but a small country population-wise. The airports are key, especially because a lot of the travel is internationally. And how can you make going in and out of customs, in and out of immigration as seamless and as simple as possible? As an example, we've worked with Brisbane Airport. They now have a departure card that you need to fill out, but you can do it on your smartphone. It remembers your profile, so every time you travel, all you have to do is put in your flight number and the date. Everything else is repetitive, and it does it automatically.
That's great.
It makes life really easy for the people that travel internationally quite a bit, which is a large number of people in Australia, just because of location. So it's called working together with them. We'll have the same type of product in Sydney and in Melbourne pretty soon, but it's how can the airport work better with the individual carriers and the carriers as a whole to make travel as seamless as possible.
Yes.
I think some of the newer technologies that we want to take advantage of it's really critical to have that partnership. If you think about, we've been talking about mobile, you start thinking about, beacon technology and, even going back when mobile was really just starting to kind of, be introduced into the industry, working with the airports to actually have mobile boarding pass scanners. I don't know if you guys ever had to deal with that kind of thing, but I was involved in that project with one of my team members, and it was, that's the kind of stuff that you have to have a partnership with an airport, or it's really hard to get those things done. So I think going forward, as we try to use some of the newer technologies that are out there, especially from a mobile perspective, it's going to be critical to have strong partnerships with your airports. And certainly that's easier when it's a hub airport or a focus airport where you have a good, strong relationship. It's probably a lot more challenging when you have the smaller outstations. So that's a challenge for our operational team, is to really focus on that.
And you raise an interesting couple of points there. I think from my perspective, what I'd like to understand, I've spoken to a couple of the large airports, and their view is that they'd like the airlines to share their customer data because they feel that they've invested a lot more than just infrastructure, but in the retail that they've put in the airports, everything that they've done to enhance the customer experience. Where do you fall in terms of sharing that customer data with the airport to enhance that retail experience.
Look,
Looks like you have an opinion on this, Timothy.
Not that I don't have
Dangerous
a
one.
small opinion on many things, but I think this issue of whose customer it is has actually really been divisive between airports and airlines for a long period of time. You know, the whole issue around airport fees and you know, basically a different business model where airlines are highly tactical, where I worry about my next quarter. An airport has to make an infrastructure decision, which is a 15 to 20 year decision. That's very hard for people to do. This issue of retailing and what the retailing experience is comes down to, again, what is the value of the whole package of experience. I think Ian was talking about this with the partnership issue. I can have fixed partners and I can have dynamic partners. My airport is a partner, whether he's an active partner, a passive partner, an aggressive, a defensive, or even a hostile partner. He's still there. I've got to live with that. The customer is hoping and expecting that you two have kind of figured it out. So when you go into this finger-pointing mode that says, well, whether I like it or not, it doesn't matter. So looking at this retail experience, look at what happens in some airports in Australia, I'll pick on Sydney, is the buy duty-free before you arrive. Really nice experience. I can actually buy it. It's simple. I go and I pick up my stuff and I walk through. I'm done. That sort of thing says, look, why can't we work cooperatively together? Does it matter where that delivery point is? We're working with an airline who has the ability to say, where would you like to have your delivery? Do you want to have it before you board the aircraft, on the aircraft, when you get off the aircraft? Everything is in the same environment. The e-commerce is the same, the warehousing, all those systems, they all fit together because we have a common data picture. The airport is typically passive in that. The airline is typically ahead of the game. But you look at airport retailing. Airport retailing is what makes an airport as cheap as it is today. And airlines kind of forget that piece, but you need it. But I think there is this ability to pass through some of those barriers which are still artificial and are in place today and need to be kind of blown through and just say, look, I can do this. It's not going to be consistent. You know, is your airport in Townsville going to have the same experience as Brisbane? Absolutely not.
No. Right.
Yeah? Right. The same thing applies everywhere else. So an airport has a specific brand connotation value of what the airport is. An airline is different. So in the same way you have segmentation, you have location-based items. Understanding all those pieces and put them into context still is, I think I've said this before, it's still not something I think that everybody is taking into consideration yet. And you've got to have a kind of a more open mindset, something that the airlines, again, have not been used to in the past. They've always said, I will define exactly who my relationships are. Those relationships will be brand-based across the board. Well, you can't do that anymore. Because when I arrive in LaGuardia, is my experience going to be the same? Teasing me. Is my experience going to be the same as it was when I left Dallas?
Yeah.
You know, I'm still boarding an aircraft. I'm still achieving my same journey. To me, it's the same.
But and that's the important piece, is the journey. So the airport
Absolutely.
is part of the journey.
Absolutely.
And that's what we have to ensure, is that
Yeah.
how do we, for our customers, ensure that the working together with airports, working together with the priority boarding, working together with security, working together with how we share information, and there is a fine line, I think, in terms of what you can share, because you do start to impinge on potentially on what customers feel from a trust perspective in terms of the data that you have on them. But it is very much a part of the journey, and if that journey is a good experience, then customers will come back to you. And that's a very important part of what we need to get right with the airports. You know, whilst there is a need for efficiency and there is a need for how do we get customers through as quickly as possible in terms of those types of experiences. You know, when you're running a long delay and there's long weather and there's lots of things for the customers to do, at the end of the day, it can be quite a good thing in terms of how you manage the bad experiences as well. So it's very important that you work closely with the airports to ensure that overall customer journey, because that's what they see, they just see the journey,
Well,
is
an
as
airport
efficient
actually
as can be.
has more of the ability to screw up your brand experience than anybody else,
That's right.
effectively.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
because you look at the stressful experience from the moment you enter into the airport infrastructure until the moment you leave. Maybe with
security
or without
line is number one.
Security,
Absolutely.
whatever.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Blame it on the airline.
Yeah,
I do.
Well, but fortunately, we have an organization called the TSA. We can blame everything on here, but it is that piece that actually can enhance or can really damage your journey experience, because it's the beginning and it's the end of the experience. You know, the armchair in the sky thing is great, but you know, dealing with the broken old rickety railway at either end is not something that people like.
So I'd like to ask, we look out this vision of the future. If airlines fail, or if an airline fails to reach this vision, what's the biggest single cause of that? In other words, what's the biggest single challenge you face getting to this end game?
You have to be dynamic.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
You have to be dynamic. So if you don't consistently evolve and change, you're going to get run over. And if you
Yeah.
get run over, you'll die. So you always have to try to think a half a step ahead or a step ahead of the customer. And that's why I said what you know, you can talk about what you think 2020 the
Yeah.
customer is going to want, but you don't know that because we're not there yet.
Yeah.
They could want completely different things than what we offer today, and what they look at as a value today might not be a value in 2020 or 2030. So you just consistently have to change and be nimble enough to meet the needs of the customer as their desires change.
It sounds
Without-
like there's two elements to that. You need a culture that can accept that. It's not rigid, which frankly with an operational culture there can be conflict there. You also need a tech structure that can absorb the blow and bounce back, if you will, and be
Yeah, I think
dynamic.
You need to
Is that
keep
right?
that infrastructure. The danger in all of this
Yeah.
is you start to tack on too many pieces.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
once you
Gotta be
start to
clean
tack
and
on too
simple.
many pieces, to get those pieces to consistently, as you move forward, deliver on that experience becomes a huge challenge, because you're dealing with multiple suppliers to get one action through what is a chain of potentially different systems. So you've got to ensure that your partners you select are the correct partners, and at the end of the day, it's that integration of the data into that operational delivery system across all of the channels, you know, be it where you're selling or be it where you're delivering, is very key. And that simplification becomes your nimble ability to continue to
Yeah.
be dynamic,
Yeah.
continue to meet the market needs, and at the end of the day, have the infrastructure and the kit in place where you've kind of decoupled the plumbing and you've got a much more nimble website on the front end that's able to do a lot more in terms of the way that it sits and communicates. And you can then determine what pieces of the back-end plumbing you're going to require when, and you're able to deliver on it.
I think that there's a very clear message that we can deliver to the audience and obviously to our friends and clients, whatever, which is digital-powered agility. That it's this agility that is missing, I think. Airlines don't like agility. It's not something that they do, because even though a plane takes off and lands, the infrastructure to support that takeoff and landing process is not a very agile process. It's very operationally focused, you know, and excellence and moving just one widget can have impact all the way down the line. But even within that, I think this digital-powered agility is a must for any organization.
Yeah.
And I think still airlines, particularly traditional airlines, have struggled with that. None of you is actually a very old legacy carrier, if you think about it that way. None of you dominate your marketplace. If we had Qantas or Delta or SAA in the room, the conversation would be a little bit different, because their challenges are a lot harder because they have this legacy of ancient management that has sat there. You chaps have all had to come through, fight the big boy to achieve some level of stability, and that has enabled you to have this digital agility in your culture. Can you say the same for SAA? Can you say the same for Qantas?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this culture of innovation is really the most important point here. Is, you know, first of all, we don't know that it's going to be a digital world in 2020. Let's just, you know, who knows what it's going to be, right? We don't know that. So it's about having a culture of innovation, having the ability and the desire to have, you know, very rapid speed to market. That's really what the most important thing is to achieve these things, is having that culture that encourages that.
Just one other point,
Please.
which is I think the tools and technologies are there.
Yeah.
We're getting there because there are things that you can now you can do with data that you couldn't do. I think the one thing that can be underestimated is collaboration across the different traveling partners or the ecosystem. Just look at simple alliances or code shares and interlines, and then not to mention the credit card partners or the hotel partners and how are airlines going to collaborate, how much data sharing is going to happen, because the traveler is going to think about the journey. And more often than not, the journey is going to get associated with the airline more so than the other partners. So if data sharing and collaboration with the other partners becomes that much more important for the travelers, experience association with the airline, how much progress we're going to make over the next 5 years to move the needle on that. So that's an important aspect that I don't think we can underestimate.
My experience in digital transformation, the toughest issues are, as you're saying, it's not the tech, it's not the vendors, it's the people issues and transforming. You have an industry where there has to be a cascade down to thousands, tens of thousands of people who are truly your interface with the customers. Let's say we've got our strategy, we've got our tech, it's set up. How do you inculcate this culture? I mean, what are the guts of how you do a cultural transformation as well as a technological transformation? What are people doing now?
Brain transplants usually work.
There we are.
I think this might be a little harder for some of us to answer because, like Virgin America, we've been flying for 8 years. I've been with the company for 11 years from the inception, and it's always been a culture of innovation.
Okay.
So for us, that maybe is easy. It's about maintaining that and about pushing the envelope and making sure that people, don't get bogged down into this is how we do it every single day, and continue to think about what the next opportunity is and push for it. It's about the speed to market on some of these things that we want to do. You take an entire year to implement something that should take you 4 months, and it stifles a culture of innovation, right? So, from our perspective, I think we've always grown up with that, but I think it's probably more difficult for somebody that hasn't, or for a company that hasn't. I don't know if you guys have different
It's a valid
perspectives.
point. We're only 15 years old.
Yeah, same thing.
Similar circumstance. We had to fight a big fight with a major competitor, and we transformed the airline from a low-cost carrier to a full service, very high level of service, high cost. No, not high cost, but high quality. And we did that in a matter of a couple of years, completely rejigged the airline, and been very successful in doing that. But if you don't have people that are innovative and want to change with you, it would have never happened.
Right.
What we did at Virgin Australia would take somebody like Delta or British Air or American 5-10 years to do what we did in 2 years.
It is possible. We're a 63-year-old company.
Yeah, there you go. Different perspective.
And it's certainly possible to keep that organization energized. You've got new people coming in all the time.
Yeah.
You've got young generation who are hungry to innovate. They're hungry to share their knowledge. They're hungry to do things.
Yeah.
So how you harness that talent in your business, how you communicate in terms of what's happening with the customer, the changing nature of the environments, the challenges that you're facing. It's sharing information, and it's getting people together to solve problems at the end of the day and take ownership for those problems. So it's certainly possible to keep the momentum.
It is very hard. I think you have to have, and I like Amy's take on this, which was you push the envelope all the time. Every single day, you look for that, what can I do different today? And you don't do different just for different sake, but sometimes actually you do. And I think doing things differently teaches you how to understand what you're doing. We still have, in my view, far too many restrictions on our business models. Those restrictions are frequently government related. Obviously the operational ones, those should be there, safety ones should be there. But heck, some of these things are getting to be very silly, very arcane. They need to be removed. An airline should not have to file a fare. I mean, the whole notion of ATPCO, I'm sorry if I'm going to offend anybody here, but that whole idea of pre-filing fares, that should go out with the ARC. The have to wait 24 hours before you can change your product, that's stupid. To have only one needle that you can pull, which is called availability, that's silly. You need to think of ways to remove those types of restrictions. You need to be able to deal with the modern customer today, the guy who buys on Amazon, the guy who shops in a shop window, or he's on a Korean subway train and he picks his groceries and they're delivered to him before he gets home. He lives in this world. And our customer has radically changed from the boomers who used to have this very nice, very, very ordered and structured world, where today you're dealing with so many distractions, digital and otherwise, that you don't know what the next thing is going to be. You know, would we have predicted Uber 3 years or 4 years ago? No.
Yeah.
And clearly certain legislative bodies are not struggling with that too much today at all. But I think we have to take this responsibility more seriously, not just to our own individual businesses, but to the industry as a whole. Because the industry as a whole tends to be a laggard in certain areas. And the excuse or reason has been given was that it was all driven by operational needs and safety issues. I think we have to move beyond that. You know, you need to look at things, and the classic example, we talked about this last night, was Southwest told us, everybody said Love Field is full. Look at the amount of flights in the space of less than 14 months that they have put into Love Field. Have they expanded the size of the airport? Absolutely not. Is there more runway space? Absolutely not. Is there, I think it's about 30% more passengers flowing through that airport? Absolutely yes.
64.
64? It's huge.
Just to be precise.
Just to be precise, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, all industries are seeing a larger technology component. I mean, you've always been tech in your own way, but it's growing, so everybody's
So they need to spend more.
spend more money on it.
Spend more money
Exactly.
in IT. I
Exactly.
really believe that.
Yeah.
And so there's just an incredible war for talent out there. Are you struggling to find, you know, generally a younger demographic, got a lot of expertise? These folks are in demand.